Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm a video specialist here at eLearning Brothers. Today we're going to be talking about Rockstar Reporting with xAPI. This webinar will be recorded. We'll get a copy of it emailed out to all of our attendees later in the day. We're also going to be posting a copy of this webinar on our blog later in the week. If you have questions during the webinar, we'll be ready to answer your questions in the questions panel. I'll try to bring that up to Bill periodically throughout the webinar as well to get those questions answered. Just so you know, one of the things that we like to do after the webinar is try to follow up as soon as possible. Sometimes it's just to get your feedback. Most of the time we would like to touch base and find out if anybody needs some one-on-one clarification about the webinar topics after the fact. Also, we're going to be giving everyone that is attending a free eLearning Brothers account. So if you don't already have one of those, you can be looking forward to that in your email later in the week. As I mentioned before, we have Bill Milstid, our senior developer, with us today. Thanks for joining us, Bill. We're excited to hear what you have to teach us about xAPI. And so without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, Bill, and I'll pass the screen over to you as well.
All right.
Looks great.
Okay, everybody. So good afternoon or morning, I guess, depending on where you're at. As Andrew mentioned, I'm Bill Milstid. I'm a senior designer developer here at eLearning Brothers. We're going to talk about xAPI today and specifically how we can use rapid authoring tools with xAPI to enhance the reporting. I want to kick off today with just kind of a little story, though, because I get to spend my time making things for you guys that are real fun and awesome, templates, tools, widgets. But it wasn't always that way. A time ago, I worked in a much more common environment, right? So corporate space, small team, low budget, big backlog, whole lot of learners, and a whole lot of needs that sometimes we really couldn't get filled. And a common situation for us back then would be something kind of like the following, right? So we develop a course and a rapid authoring tool. We use a lot of Storyline, some Captivate as well. Run it through the QA process cleanly. We launch it to our user or learner groups. Everything comes back great, no problems. All's well and good. But then we start getting some reports, right? So got a handful of users who happen to be pretty important users, right? They're having issues that we can't replicate. And we know something's going on because we're seeing a launch attempt on the LMS. Our admins can give us that information. But they're not getting all the way through. We just can't see where they're falling off, right? That would happen to us a whole lot, more than we certainly wanted to. And a big question for us ended up being, how can you quickly and easily diagnose where an issue is occurring in a course or for a given learner if you can't see what they're doing in the course, right? And that's a common question, at least I've heard a number of our users here at eLearning Brothers ask as well. So I would imagine maybe some folks of you have run into that, and that's kind of something to think about while we're going through this. Right? Have you ever been in a situation where you needed more reporting than you could normally get out of your LMS, or needed to track one individual all the way through a module? Now, there are a number of really good, very creative answers about how to handle that kind of a situation. I'm sure some of you guys have some good ones. We have some good answers on how to do that kind of thing in a non-standard way on the eLearning blog, eLearning Brothers blog, for instance. But in my situation, most of those kind of creative solutions weren't really applicable, largely because of compliance issues, things like that. For us, it was kind of short of really sitting with a user and observing what they were doing, or having one of our admins just check a box and say this person completed a course. We didn't have a whole lot of ways to be able to, kind of figure out what was going on and correct our issues. Around 2013 or so, we started to hear about something called xAPI, new to the industry, and it seemed kind of like the thing that could solve all of our problems, right? So it could provide individual, really detailed tracking if that's how we wanted to, put it into place. But it also seemed like it could provide an opportunity to enhance mobile learning or to take learning completely out of the LMS, which in the industry I was in at the time, that could have been and still certainly can be a game changer for an environment that, maybe you've got learners that perhaps need to function away from a computer. problem was that we were all very excited, but we just didn't know how to get started. We weren't really sure how to implement. And I think that's pretty much the kind of still the state of the industry today with regards to what we normally do on a day-to-day basis, rapid authoring. How to tie xAPI stuff and rapid authoring together. It's still a bit of a both exciting prospect for a lot of folks, and also still pretty challenging for a whole lot of folks. Very difficult to get started. But we fixed that, or we certainly believe we did, and I'm here to kind of show you a little bit about how today. So that's what we're going to talk about, is how, the current state of xAPI and rapid authoring, and then a quick look at what we've done to get you as a user, as an e-learning developer, up and running with xAPI with no code and basically no startup. So that being said, what I do want to do before we get too started is take a poll. I think Andrew's going to throw these up on screen. We're going to have 2 questions kind of back to back here. The first one, are you familiar with xAPI? I would assume most folks here are at least somewhat familiar with xAPI. That's on the call, but maybe not. So if we could just get a quick kind of feel of that, and then we're going to ask another question right afterwards.
Sure, those responses are coming in. I'll give you guys about 5 more seconds to vote and let us know your relationship with xAPI. All right, and here's those results, Bill. 85% of our audience has never heard of it, or has heard of it, but never tried to use it. 9% have used it here or there, 4% have never heard of it, and 2% of our audience is xAPI masters.
Well, I'll be honest with you, the next poll was really how many of you tried to put it into an e-learning project specific to a rapid authoring tool. Let's toss that up just to see, but I'm assuming that the majority of us is probably going to be no on that answer, given the response on the last one. And that's actually a great response. That's exactly where I was hoping everybody would be today. I've heard of it, but haven't really put it into use.
So the results of having implemented it, I'll go ahead and put those up on the screen here. 91% have never implemented xAPI.
And that, I think, that's probably reflective of again, kind of where we are just in the industry, right? A whole lot of excitement. I think a lot of us know what's going on with xAPI, or at least in terms of the promise of xAPI, but maybe haven't put it into place, or certainly haven't put it into place. And that's good. That's what we're talking about today. Now, a few caveats before we get started on that, or really, I guess, one main caveat. I'm not going to cover a ton of deep specifics on what xAPI is, and especially given the polling results, I think that's valid. We should have a general overview or general idea of what it is. We're going to cover that at the most basic anyway. But a lot of the real nitty-gritty stuff with xAPI, we don't actually need to get too much into for what we're going to talk about today. And there's a million resources out there that explain it probably better than I could ever hope to, right? We've got community resources. Lectora actually has some amazing stuff that's just about xAPI as a whole, and then also how to apply it to their tool. The spec is out there on the GitHub with tons of documentation. So I'm not going to address that. What I am going to do is I'm going to look at just kind of a very brief, light overview of what xAPI is, statements in general, and then again, how that applies to a rapid authoring context, and then what we are doing for you guys with that. Okay. So getting started, we're going to just jump right in with kind of some brief overviews of xAPI. I got 2 up on screen here, right? We've got a standard xAPI overview and an even simpler xAPI overview, or explanation. The standard overview of xAPI is that the Experience API, or you might heard it as Tin Can in the past, is pretty much at its most basic. It's a specification, just like SCORM is a specification for communicating with a learning record store or an LRS. All right. So it's a communication layer that allows a course or an object to send human readable, people can look at it and know what's going on immediately, data to track a learning event. But that learning event doesn't necessarily need to be tied to a SCORM package or a web-based module. It can be pretty much anything. One of the promises of xAPI is that it could be theoretically employed in an offline environment, right? So the explanation, that general explanation seems very, I get that, but there's still a gap for me, and was in the past when I first heard that. And it's that it can be anything part. That always kind of confused me, and it always took over my definition of xAPI for me. So I really like to just think of xAPI in almost too simplistic manner, probably, which again benefits us for rapid authoring. So we look at the even simpler explanation. It's that xAPI it's just a learning spec, again like SCORM, but it uses JSON or JavaScript object notation to send really simple statements about each action that a learner takes to a learning record store, an LRS. Basically, it's a format used in some JavaScript to tell your LRS stuff in the following statement format, and this is what they use: actor, verb, object. I like to think of it as just someone did something, okay? So if we look at it in an e-learning framework, right, practically kind of looks like this. This is our buddy Zach. He's a notorious character around here. He likes to take courses and help out. Good man. He recently took an xAPI course and mastered all of its objectives. Okay. Now, in turn, that course, that e-learning module, let's say it's a storyline course, is going to trigger a statement, some code, some JavaScript that has this kind of stuff in it, right? A whole bunch of data. And really what that does is it sends something like this to our LRS. This is kind of the basic promise of xAPI, right? In one little view, we can see a few seconds ago that xAPI mastered the xAPI overview module. Now let's say that we applied that instead of at the page level, right? Or the program level, he mastered the entire module here, the entire course. Let's say we applied that to an entire course with several slides and all kinds of buttons or learner actions, sent the same stuff to our LRS. Well, you might get to see something more like this. This is a look inside of an LRS that we use that is Zach walking through a storyline course. And you can see that he's experienced several slides down here at the bottom. But also as we go up closer towards the top, he's reviewing a scenario and voting it down, reviewing another, voting that down, and another, and voting it down. Looks like he came back and re-reviewed this scenario content 1 and voted that back up. Now, that's a lot more information than I've been able to get from LMSs that I've worked with, regularly in the past. Certainly at a glance like that, and certainly, kind of consecutively, so you can see click-wise what's going on. That was something that we dreamed for with the system we had in place, when it was a daily situation for me. And all of this is going on in just that little teeny bit of code I showed you earlier, that little block that was off to the side. So what I want to do is actually break that down, because that pretty much is the bulk of what matters with xAPI. So we're going to look at that real fast. So again, if this was the code that I showed on screen a few seconds ago that we just kind of glanced at, that sent our little statement to our LRS. And it's made up of 3 different parts. We've got an actor chunk, a verb chunk, and an object chunk. We're going to look at each one of those right now, so that you can just get a feel for, again, what the basic parts of a statement are here. And then we're going to link that as we go down the road, okay? So the first part of our statement is our actor info. This is typically handled at launch, right? So whatever is delivering your xAPI course out there, if you're pushing it through a URL, if you've got it coming from an LMS or an LRS, this stuff is handled in that manner generally. And it's got 2 parts. You have the display name, right? So name xAPI, and you have some sort of a strict registration ID here. This can be a few different things. Again, we're not going to get into this part of the statement explicitly because there's a ton of information for it, but it follows the same pattern as everything else for the bare minimums of what you need for an xAPI statement, right? We've got a display piece and what we're kind of logging on the back end here to oversimplify it. Same thing with verb. Verb, again, we have our actor did a thing, someone did something. Our verb is what we did. It's got 2 parts as well at minimum. We've got an ID here, and that is your verb ID is the URL to the verb that you're using in your course. Everything with xAPI works off of unique individual URLs. Again, that's all kind of documented in the spec, but You can use any value you want here. We'll talk about that later, but it's best to use to predefine stuff. And it also has a display, just like in our actor statement, right? So this is ultimately what he did, he mastered, and this is how we have it show up in our LRS. Similarly with our object, someone did something. This is our thing. We use an ID here, a unique URL, right? That we own, that's unique just to us and this specific object or course or whatever you're defining. And then we also have a definition which serves as both what the LRS kind of marks that as and what it displays back to that early statement that we saw. Now, this little block here is kind of your bare minimum for an xAPI statement. But with most things, especially in e-learning, right, we can complicate that as much as we need or want to. So there's a ton of other stuff that you can add in here to give you much more detail on what's going on in your course or with your user, depending on your situation. But this is the minimum. You can add in results, context, responses, score, stuff like that. Again, just to suit what you need, and how you choose to use that will affect, well, really how your statements come in, and then also the type of reporting that you're getting. But at bare minimum, this is what you got to send out of a tool in order to get something into your LRS. Now, that being said, in that quick little bit, we've actually covered the nuts and bolts of what xAPI actually is. We're using JavaScript to send a specific format over to an LRS to tell us what our user is doing. We simplify it down to that, which is a lot different than how I had originally thought of it, I know. It makes a lot more sense in e-learning context to me, but that may not be the case for you guys. So before we go too much further with looking at like, okay, now we got these basics, how do they relate to these tools? I just want to stop and just kind of informally check and see if there are any questions about this basic stuff that either have popped up already in the chat, or if you guys want to take a few moments and throw those over to us now, might be a good time.
So Bill, there's a couple questions coming in here. First of all, there's lots of cool positive feedback. I feel smarter about this already, one person says.
Awesome.
Okay, question. So the code is embedded in the course and then it's read by the LRS or LMS, is that correct?
Well, kind of. So there's kind of two ways to go about that, and that's some of what we're going to tackle in a second. But to front load it, there is some embedded stuff, some embedded code that comes out of Storyline, Lectora, Captivate, automatically. You don't got to do anything with it. It just, boom, sends it out there. But, as we'll see in a few minutes, it's a little limited. So thinking back to how we were framing xAPI earlier, right? It's basically JavaScript with some very specific details and whatnot, but let's limit it down to JavaScript. Well, our tools also offer us the ability to trigger JavaScript statements. So there's some cool stuff we can do there that is not built into the tool either. I'm going to show you how in a second, kind of.
Okay, yeah, we'll get into that one. Another question here is, what does a typical LMS report look like? Like, does it come out in Java?
Actually, so if we look back at that statement that I was showing you guys a few seconds ago, and actually I'll show you one live in just a few minutes as well. We look back here, this is exactly what the back end of an LRS would look like. So this is a snapshot from, looks like a couple Tuesdays ago, on the 11th, of us walking through a course that we had. This is the reporting that we get. If you notice over to the left-hand side with this LRS, you can twirl down and see a full statement. But also on this LRS, there's some additional reporting and some analytics stuff that comes packaged that you can use to further analyze these statements as well. So no, not raw Java, though you can see some of the JSON statements very cleanly. It actually comes over in human readable format.
Excellent. Let me grab another question here. So the e-learning tool allows xAPI. Oh, that one was answered. Let me grab it again. I wasn't. Okay, here we go. So the e-learning tool allows xAPI customization for each course. Is that right?
Sort of, yeah. It's kind of one of the limitations, but with certain tools. But we're gonna dive into that actually in just a few slides. So we'll table that one, and I'll show you kind of how that works in a second.
Okay, then I'll just take one more question at this point, and then we'll take more later. Can you explain the difference between an LRS and an LMS?
Absolutely. So an LMS, right? I'm not going to get too much into that. That's what we use on a daily basis, and I think there's a bunch of different ones out there. We kind of all basically know how they work. An LRS, keeping with the theme of super simplifying things, maybe more than I should sometimes. An LRS is kind of a big database. Actually, you know what I'll do right now is I will just flop over and show you one. So an LRS is basically it's a big analytic database that we have that pulls the statements that we have coming out of a course, displays them as you just saw in that statement format, and that's mostly its purpose. You can have an LRS in a multitude of flavors. You can have some that just do that. That's all they show you. Just, hey, this person did this thing. It's just a big statement viewer. But a lot of them, and we'll talk about one specifically in a bit, have analytics packages that they also offer. So it's really a way to both capture and analyze and report on your learner behavior. That's where all that data is sent. Now, the cool thing about an LRS as well is that they're generally set up to share information with other systems, right? And that's kind of how xAPI really gets to be as powerful as it can be. Is it all of its data hubs through that LRS, that database, which then can do what you need. It can parse out that data and do what you need with it. All right. So if that's all of them, Andrew, I'm going to go ahead and move on. If that works for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So we got a basic idea, right? We ran over what it did, and we also ran over that all three of these tools send statements, at least in some capacity, automatically. That's been the promise of Storyline, Captivate, and Lectora since we then look. I think Storyline 2, maybe that's when it started. I'm not 100% sure, but it's been for a while. We've had the ability here, and technically, all you have to do in those big three tools is just publish to get an xAPI course going. Kind of. I say kind of because you do have to resolve some launch string data and some specifics that you can find a lot of information about on the individual tools, help resources, or on the xAPI itself. Basically, think back to that actor stuff that I was saying has to be in there, but it's not in the tool. But really, for getting this, aside from that, all you have to do to get your Storyline course reporting or your Captivate course or Lectora course reporting to xAPI or reporting through xAPI is publish. So I want to run through what the publish options look like, and then I'm going to show you exactly the types of statements that come out of Storyline, Captivate, and Lectora. So that then we can talk about other stuff and how to make it cooler. So publishing, with everything, with all three of these tools, but it's simple for publishing. It's button click stuff, which is why we love them, right? Storyline publishing, you press publish, and you select LMS at the left sidebar, and then in the reporting dropdown right here, you select Tin Can API. Now, you'll want also to click the reporting and tracking button. Though technically you don't necessarily have to, but you should. Because in this, you set your xAPI specifics. Title and description are pretty self-explanatory. But then you have this identifier and launch URL thing here. Now, think back to that activity ID or object ID thing that we were looking at in our statement, right? xAPI wants each object that you're reporting on, whether that's a course or a button or a video time or whatever thing you did, right? Clicked, watched, who knows? xAPI wants that to be unique. And so to make it unique, you frame that in terms of a URL, like we were talking about earlier. That's what this identifier really is. This is kind of the base identifier for a Storyline course. So the way we do it is we set up a directory that we're going to use, right? So eLearning Brothers, xAPI, this thing. And we plop that in there. It's unique to us. We own it. We control what content's going to be there. We know nothing else is going to take that name. It's a complex enough name. Nobody else is going to happen upon it, etc. Launch URL, you can leave that at story.html if you're hosting it like on an LMS or an LRS or whatever, or you put the actual launch URL, the host directory where this course will be stored if you're going to be putting it not on an LMS. So for instance, let's say I host this course that I've published at this identifier URL. I then put that value here in the launch URL. And once I upload my package to something like Stormcloud or an LMS, instead of trying to launch it from that resource, it's actually going to try to go out and find it on the launch URL that I've placed, if you have that capability in your user file. Now, one quick little note about that, and this is a little in the weeds because we're just kind of looking at options, but just keeping that identifier and how things need to be unique in mind. Storyline actually creates unique identifiers for each slide or element that it's tracking, and it appends that to the identifier that you provide once you publish. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. So that previous example you guys saw, right, add an activity ID. This identifier was eLearningBrothers.com, xAPI, temp, jet black, and then we have our little directory name here. Now, if you notice, it added an http:// here for this course level identifier. What this course was actually, it was a one-slide course, just a single slide interaction that I published. But if you notice, Storyline has now created 2 entries in this XML document. This is a tin can XML document that it creates when you publish, some of the backend metadata stuff. It's actually created 2 entries here. And if you notice the second one, not only has it added that HTTP to the beginning of it, it's also added this slash and then a bunch of numbers. I didn't add that. That automatically came in from Storyline. It's adding that to each slide that you have in your module so that it can enforce a unique ID coming off of that individual slide to help keep your tracking separate, so you're at the right level. Now, that's important for 2 reasons. One is what I consider to be a little kind of a buggy aspect of it, and that at least as of the last time I checked last week, if you save over a file with a new file, that ID will persist every time you publish. So let's say you've got course 1 and then you save that course, you make some changes as course 2, but it's a totally different thing, you publish it. Storyline's going to still try to assign that same ID there. So you need to be aware of it so that you change your workflow a little bit in xAPI. But also number 2 is that when you're setting up custom statements, which we're going to kind of hint at a little bit in a second here, you need to know about that so that you can match up to what Storyline's doing. By and large, though, that specific detail aside, it's a few click process. You click publish, you click the tin can option, you enter your identifier and where your launch path is, and go, and you've got an xAPI course right there out the box. Similarly, Captivate. Man, it's super easy to publish an xAPI course out of Captivate. In your e-learning output, you select xAPI, and then in here you set up your reporting options and configure. Now, Captivate has a few more options than Storyline does with regards to success criteria and everything on this front page. Most of those you can kind of figure out by context. They're all pretty specific, are pretty easy to understand. Important is when you get in your configuration thing here, much like Storyline, you enter an identifier. Now, Captivate wants that to be the actual web URL, so you enter that for real here. It also, just like Storyline did, it adds a unique identifier for each slide in your Captivate course, right? So you've got a course level identifier, which is that main URL that you're playing with, or where it's hosted, most likely in a lot of cases. And then for each slide following that, Captivate's going to add an additional identifier to the back of it. You notice right here, it says jet black 4-tab, click to reveal. What that is that's the actual slide title that I was using when I published on that specific slide, right? So Captivate, rather than adding a random numerical value or a serial to it, whatever we want to call it, it just picks up your slide title. I actually like that a little bit more. It seems a little more user-friendly. All right, last one, Lectora. Across the board, actually, Lectora is the easiest to use with regards to xAPI. You click Publish to xAPI. It's its own setting in the drop-down, and then you have one field to enter. It's your activity ID, which is just that. You put the URL that you want to use as your unique ID. Also, just for development with Lectora, it's also the kind of easiest to use of all of them. in as much as that it has built-in custom statements, which is kind of that's very unique with the three that we're talking about. All right, so let's say you publish them. So you go through, you open up a brand new course, or you create a brand new course from scratch. You hit publish, and you send it off, and you view your LRS. The types of statements that you're actually going to start seeing out of an out-of-the-box xAPI course from Storyline, Captivate, and Lectora are all up here. Learning Solutions Mag back in June or July, I think, did a much more involved overview of this than I have on screen. It's just way simpler. Check it out. Probably easy to Google, and they'll show you a bunch of detail in there if you're curious. For me, the most important and most relevant stuff is just where the tools are reporting and what they're reporting on by default. And so this is it, really. Out of the box, this is what the three tools do. At the course level, right? So your main actual course, let's say Fire Safety 101, right? The actual course itself, not the slides that are in it. Each of the tools will report an actor, attempted, and then whatever your course name is. So Zach attempted Fire Safety 101. At the slide level access, right? They're going to send a statement that's like the actor experience, whatever the slide title is. So our Fire Safety 101 course, let's say we've got a few sub-slides in that. We've got fire extinguishers, an emergency services type, let's say. So we would have our Zach attempted Fire Safety 101 statement that would show up in our LRS. And then we would have Zach experienced, let's say, fire extinguisher. Zach experienced emergency services. Okay? Back to our course level. Once you hit every slide in the course, once you finish what's in there, it's going to send a completed statement in the same format. Zach completed Fire Safety 101. If you have pass or fail criteria set up, it's going to send it up in that same statement. Zach passed, Zach failed, Fire Safety 101. Now, when we get over to the assessments, like built-in assessment stuff, quizzing that's using the built-in quiz tool features, you start to get a little more detail. You start to see the statements are a little more complicated. What you see is a little clearer and a little more poignant. So Zach correctly answered whatever our question text was, and then in that statement we will also have what the response was. So Zach answered our fire is dangerous with true. We will see that kind of detail in the statement. Coming from an out-of-the-box xAPI course, no work on your end. Now, that still isn't a ton of detail, though. Because really, we're still just talking about our user saw a course, which slides they saw in the course, and if they completed it, assuming we don't have assessment stuff going on. So that's not really up to the promise of xAPI, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, rapid authoring probably really isn't the main, I think, domain of xAPI or the intended focus, but we can certainly use it for our purposes. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about, because what would be really nice here, right, would be if we could click a button and we could see that Zach clicked a button, or Zach chose option B in this informal scenario that was built on a custom slide that I made. Or let's say we had 3 different paths a user could take in a course. Which one did they choose? Which buttons did they select in a software simulation? All that stuff, that to me, that kind of detailed tracking, we can absolutely do with xAPI, but you certainly can't do it with what these built-in statements are. So how do we get there? Well, we fixed it. Think back to the beginning of this, right? xAPI is basically JavaScript. Now, all of us really aren't JavaScript developers for the most part, right? By day, we use rapid authoring tools for a lot of reasons, and one of them is that it takes care of a lot of the heavy lifting with JavaScript and other things for us. Now, even if we were JavaScript developers, if you can imagine going through an entire course, let's say even one slide like this, where we wanted to track each button click that's going on in a course module, course design, whatever, a full program, that's a lot of development time and a lot of work. It's a lot of man hours, certainly, especially depending on how you want to set that up. So in either case, if you want custom statements in a standard rapid authoring tool as of today, you got to put a lot of effort into JavaScript development and, well, just putting that JavaScript onto your slide. We don't like that idea for a number of reasons. One, we don't really like playing with JavaScript in templates, and most of our users don't either. And, well, we like to give you guys things to help you save time. That's kind of our main deal. So we created this new product that we've got that's xAPI enabled template styles, which are exactly what they sound like. But I'm gonna go over them right now and show you guys some examples and talk about what they are. So first thing, what's a template style? Well, a template style it's a collection of matching templates. Basically, it's like a family, brother and sister files to drive a pun home, of layouts, interactions, everything else that kind of all look the same, all match each other, and all have kind of consistent assets, right? We've basically built a series of families using the same types of files. Each one has 30 or so files right now, and that's expected to grow. And we've gone in and just created some really cool different designs for each of those different files. Now, within each style, we've got some interactions, some informal knowledge checks. We've got a default quiz. We've got a layout file that has, I think, 30 extra slides in it. Beyond the 30 files you get, we've got some scenarios. There's a game in there, a bunch of click to reveals. The idea is basically we want to give you everything you need so that you could just take a style, pick it up, and start a course and build and get it done without ever really having to do very much custom development, like at all, which saves a ton of time. And by the way, since we're using the same files in all of these styles, that means that you can bounce back and forth between one style and expect, well, the files to always be in there, right? So let's, I want to use this process flow interaction, but I want to use it in this flat blue style. Well, you're in luck. There's a process flow interaction there for you, and they all work the same between styles. So we thought that was pretty cool. But then, keeping with the point of today's conversation, right? We wanted to take it a little further. And so what we did is we have added xAPI triggers to everything in every one of our styles in every tool. So what that means is without touching JavaScript, without ever having to bother it, you can get into one of these courses and track every learner event, every click, every swipe, every decision that gets made without having to fiddle with any JavaScript that we don't want to look at, change the code for your individual statements, or mess around with pretty much anything. If you wanted to, you take this file, one of these files, download it, publish it, and see it right on your LRS. And so to show that to you guys, one of the styles that we have open right now that's not featured on this little 8-tab click to reveal, which by the way is it's in our style family here, is the template that I'm working with right now. So this is this presentation we've been watching is set in a style family called Campfire. I picked it up and used it to build out what we're doing with pretty much no editing. I mean, I had to do some custom development because I did some quirky things. But all of the icons that I used that you may have seen, all the layouts have been included. And actually, most of the characters you saw at the very beginning of it are also included as assets in this particular style. And make that even cooler, to me at least, while we've been going through this presentation, in the background, this presentation, this Campfire style storyline template that came out of the library, has been pushing data about every step that we've taken to our LRS. And so this is it kind of brought into the course, right, through an iframe here. But if you look, you can actually see where we started. So here's this Rockstar Reporting. We attempted this presentation. You can see I've experienced a few slides. Right? Those are our standard verbs that we get out of Storyline. But then all of a sudden here, I'm starting to get I discovered how to start xAPI. I asked poll 1 and asked poll 2. I revealed a standard xAPI overview as well as the simpler xAPI overview. Experienced some more slides, analyzed some parts of a statement here, right? Experienced some more slides. Then we explained Storyline, Captivate, Lectora options. And now after we've seen all these styles, right, we're up here experiencing this xAPI statement viewer. This is all real time. It's all happening as we're chatting. And while that looks like maybe something that I kind of made special for this course, it's not. It actually is just a view of our testing LRS that we've got open, which is, my internet's a little slow, so it might be taking a bit there. But these are the exact same statements that you were seeing earlier. And if I twirl them down, you'll see what's come out of Storyline here. We've got, back to that very beginning conversation, we've got our actor, got our verb, right? Saw what our ID is, right? In this case, it was that particular button. All right, movement xAPI styles is how we want to describe that or show that. And then we've got some background stuff coming in from the LRS. But we've got actor, verb, object, again, coming directly out of our Storyline course, largely just picked up from the library. Which I think is pretty cool.
Question with that last report, what's the difference between saw and experienced?
So the difference between saw and experienced at its simplest right now, there's a couple ways that we can explain that. The very simplest explanation is that experienced right here, that's a default statement coming out. Think back to that table. That's the default statement coming out of Storyline. That's all we're going to get. That's the most detail that we're ever going to get out of Storyline by default for what was going on this xAPI template styles slide, right? We experienced it. Now, if I hadn't put any custom statements in there, the next thing you would see would be that I experienced this statement viewer, the next slide. But actually, when I was on this slide, right, so this one, not the statement viewer, but the one before that being this template style slide, right, I clicked all these 8 tabs. Well, that's what all these saw statements are. These are custom statements that have come out over and above the capacity of the kind of default Storyline reporting. These are the verbs that we've placed in for that particular action. Now, when I said earlier that you could go in and publish one of these courses and have it report however you wanted without messing code up, that question is probably a great example of it. Because what you can do with how we've set these files up, I know I'm kind of teasing you guys a little bit with it right now by not showing the back end of the file, but there's some reasons for that at the moment. What you can do as a user is actually go in and put whatever you want this custom verb to be. So all of this detail between I hit one slide and I hit this other slide, all the missed stuff that Storyline isn't reporting on, we are. And you, as a user, you can go in and instead of making that saw, you can make that pressed or focused or clicked or reviewed or whatever verb you want. You can also match that up to the appropriate verb ID, right, where it resolves to in a defined directory. And you can do that without ever touching JavaScript. You do it through the Storyline interface, using the panels you're familiar with and the day-to-day practices you use in rapid authoring. It's literally, you get to click this value, type in what you want, and it'll report whatever it is that you said. Now, hopefully you guys think that's cool. I do. But if you're questioning, how do I use it, which is fair, right? If we think earlier, there's a lot of questions about what the difference between an LMS and an LRS is out there, because it's not really well explained. Like, we don't do a good job of breaking some of that stuff down. in context for what we do for rapid authoring stuff. So a lot of us just don't have an LRS, so it would be pretty hard to get started with xAPI, yada, yada, yada. So we have kind of two thoughts on that. First and foremost, you don't need to use the xAPI stuff that we've put in here if you don't want to. A couple things about the way that we've set up these files that we want you guys to go kind of check out in the library and access if you're a user, is that, like, for instance, in Storyline, we've put a trigger in the xAPI file, in the files that we're providing you, so you can actually turn xAPI off in general, and it just won't even send statements, so you don't have to worry about it. But even if you leave them on, these files all work very well as a standard scoring package, so you can still, like, I just like those styles, and I don't want the xAPI. Not a problem. You can still plop them on an LMS and use them, and they work wonderfully. But also check with your LMS, because some LMSs have xAPI capabilities. Like Scorm Cloud has an LRS. A lot of people use Scorm Cloud for testing. You can set up an LRS in there. They have a ton of options that they can help you with as well. And I believe there are a few other LMSs that are kind of packaging things up like that. And so to that end, we've tested all these files on Scorm Cloud, them hosting them and them pulling statements into their LRS, and they all look good. But what I think a better option is, just because, I don't know, it's free and we've been using it for a while and it comes from us, so I like it, but we got you covered, all right? So eLearning Brothers, we've partnered with Veracity LRS, which is actually the one I was showing you guys, to provide, it's a better than free account to all the users that are interested. And to give you an idea, this LRS, okay, where you can see, hey, here's every statement every user's made on all of my courses. This is a free account that I'm using. We're not using a paid account. And then beyond that, they come with analytics. So right now I'm looking at, and some of the way, this is our testing, so some of these analytics are probably a little different than how we might set them up if we were going to be pushing out to a course. But just by publishing a course and letting my users hit it, I'm literally doing nothing else. I can then go bounce into Veracity, click analytics, and I can see user activity and course activity over time. I can see which actors have the most events. Like my boy Zach Batty over here, he's not been doing much. I got to talk to him when we're off this, because apparently that xAPI course is the only thing on his radar right now. We can also see the most recent courses, top objects, most active individuals, again in a different way here. We know that our tools also work with this LRS. So yeah, I don't know. If you need an xAPI enabled system to report on and you want to come check out these files, we do know that's a big limitation for a lot of folks, and where to get started and which is the best LRS. This is a good one. We wanted to set you up with something to help you out and maybe get you a little more than some of the other free accounts might provide. So we set you up there too. I only really have like one more slide, and it's actually kind of quirky stuff about these tools. So I think I might skip it and instead just see if there are any questions to close out, since we're running up on the hour here. If anybody has anything they'd like to address, big questions that didn't get hit throughout, whatever, or experiences you really want to share with the group, we got another 10 or so minutes. I think maybe we could devote that time to that. If not, I'll bounce over to those quirks and share some of those with you too.
Sure, we've got quite a few questions here that we can awesome. Work with. So first of all, are these templates included in an existing library, or is this something new that needs to be purchased above, that they have a current template subscription?
Right. So these are going into our general template library. As far as I'm aware, I don't believe we're creating any new tiers for that. I think Thomas is on the phone and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I highly doubt it. I know this is kind of our big push. We've got users. We want you to come be a user. We want you to stay being a user if you already are. And we're putting these files out there to help you guys, get your course going. I'd be pretty surprised if we separated them up more than we already have.
Sure. So Thomas, I know you didn't plan on speaking. I'm going to open up the floor real quick. Can you give us some more information on that?
Yeah, certainly. So basically, these templates are just included with a normal template subscription. So if you are a template library subscriber already, we are uploading these xAPI templates to our library right now. Some of them are already live. A few more that he showed there are coming. They're just kind of in their final QA process before we upload. And we've got more coming. Right now, we've primarily focused on Storyline, but we're working on Captivate and Lectora. As some of you have noted, Lectora's pretty much got this feature kind of built into it, so there's not a huge rush on getting those Lectora ones out because you can basically just take our current templates and add an xAPI statement to it very, very easily. So we're not in a huge rush, but we still might include some of that in there for you guys a little bit later down the line. But we focus mostly on Storyline, getting to Captivate hopefully here in the near future. But if you are a subscriber, it's already in there. You basically, if you search the library for xAPI, it should bring up all of the templates that already have it uploaded. So.
They've all been keyworded with that. So yeah, it'll be easy to find what's already in there, and that will continue to grow.
And with that Captivate piece, not to jump too much on it, but we do have I think that should be coming out very, very soon now. So we're actively building those as we speak.
Yeah, we might have already actually uploaded Jet Black in Captivate. I'd have to go back and check. But we might already have one in there. So it's coming super soon. So
yeah. And then so we're going to be kind of doing a broader presentation on this around DevLearn. I would expect that by that point we should see
a lot more.
A lot more. Yeah, the number of files that we've got in the queue right now is it's pretty big. So I'd expect those to all start pulling over and getting dumped onto the library before DevLearn or right about then.
Excellent. Another question is, how do you query your LRS? Do you have to have an actor, verb, and object?
So query for pulling back for reporting.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's so there, I think we maybe should offline that one and just we can address that one probably in some later blog posts, just because that's it's a pretty complicated question, really. I mean, just speaking honestly, right? Because we can get very easy reporting built in from the LRS. We got visual reporting, they've got analytics. They will also dump out reports out of your LRS, especially depending on who you have. Like Veracity has a couple that the standard formats, CSV, Excel, what you'd expect, PDF stuff. They'll dump out some reports that way. You can absolutely query this stuff, but it does require you to know a little bit more about xAPI than what I had intended to kind of hit on with this, since most of the users haven't put it into place. I think maybe getting over the hurdle of like, hey, here's how we publish it. Here's how we get some initial statements going into the LRS. And then our intention is or my intention at least, is to queue up some blog posts and some project files probably. I don't know where we're at with that exactly, but to support a lot of this much more advanced stuff, like generating custom reports or generating custom queries. How do you put that LRS data to use elsewhere? Like that kind of stuff, I think we're going to tackle later on down the road as well.
Excellent. Another question. Can xAPI track video watching behavior with the Storyline seek bar, rewind, forward, pause, stop, etc.?
Man, I started shaking my head yes before I let the question finish, which is always a bad idea. You know what? With the Storyline seek bar, I would imagine absolutely, but that's going to be pretty custom. Here's the thing: you can pretty well make it track whatever you want. So, for instance, with video, the reason why I immediately started shaking my head is absolutely. You can report on at what time point an individual stopped watching a video, blah, 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 blah. Now, in our custom files, we don't have that included because that's a bit advanced above what we want. But I think there's probably a lot of room for that going forward. And as we start developing new tools, widgets, templates to go into our library of styles, right? Remember, we're going to add them into every style as we go, or at least that's our thought right now. I'm always going to have a big ear out for user feedback and user requests, right? So if that happens to be something that is valuable to a number of users, I'm pretty sure we can figure that out and provide that to the community and our users as a part of the subscription. But sure. Right now, it's not built in. If that started a long answer, yes, but not. We don't have it done that way right now. So.
Okay, great.
I would assume.
There are loads of other questions, and I think what we're going to try to do is I will get these questions to you, Bill, and we'll get them answered. If not later today, we'll get them answered before we, or we'll get them published in the blog when we put out the recording of this. So just check eLearning Brothers blog at elearningbrothers.com. I'm going to take the screen back for a second here, Bill. You had mentioned that you're going to be giving more of this sort of information around DevLearn. You're presenting at DevLearn, yes, on the Rockstar stage?
Yeah. So honestly, a little bit of it'll be pretty similar to what we're talking about here. I'm going to shorten the portion about publishing and some of that detail stuff since we're really getting up to speed now.
Right.
And then I'm actually going to look into, okay, now here's how we did it. So not only here's what you can do, but we're going to break apart a file, show you how you did it, and get into that code specifically.
That's great. So if you're going to DevLearn, come check out the eLearning Brothers booth, and right near the booth is going to be the Rockstar stage, and we'll have all kinds of cool stuff there, but in particular, Bill's presentation on xAPI. If you want to see more of these templates in action, you can schedule a demo. You can give us a call at 801-796-2767. You can send an email to info@elearningbrothers.com. If you try these templates and just can't seem to get them to work, by all means, email us. We're happy to try to troubleshoot and make sure that these are working for you. Also, as you can see there on the right side of the screen, customizable courseware, courses that put you in control. These are awesome courses. You just got to check them out yourself. You can learn more at elearningbrothers.com/customizable courseware, or give a call to that number there on the left, and we'll be happy to walk you through some of those as well. Thank you so much, Bill, for this awesome webinar. A lot of people have learned a lot, it looks like, and we'll try to get more of these questions answered offline.
All right.
See you next time.
Hey, guys.